Hello, everyone. It's Thea here from Creators for Climate. Thank you all for joining us out for today's webinar on green shouting. It's great to see so many people have signed up and are still popping in. So we launched the Green Shouting Guide at Change Now in Paris a couple of weeks ago, and it's a really important piece of work on what we should be doing right now in sustainability communication to ensure that it is loud, it's accurate, and we are communicating our wins properly. So, to dig more into what green shouting is and what it means and how it can be applicable to you and your work. Hello, yes, that's me. Maria Correa is going to kick us off, and she is one of our strategic advisors here at Creators for Climate. So I will hand over to Maria, who will set the scene for you.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today representing Creatives for Climate. If this is your first creative interaction with Creatives for Climate, we're one of the largest movements of communicators around the world, really turning the power of creative influence into a form for climate action. And this movement really started in 2019 with the aim to tackle greenwashing through awareness, education, and really sector-wide mobilization. And as a part of our growing community with over 6,000 creative professionals across 90 different countries, we have all sorts of different people, from communicators to NGOs to brands to agencies and different members of civil society, all here because they really understand, the power of communication and the influence of communication to shape culture, legitimacy, public understanding of different topics. So this movement has been really about kind of harnessing that power to make an impact. So on the next slide, some of the ways that we've been doing this over the past few years have been, again, educating and providing resources for different members to tackle greenwashing. So whether that's, the Greenwash Watch and the different swatches of greenwashing, to creating, an entire course about, how to familiarize yourselves with different types of greenwashing, and an entire guide that could be used by communicators, agency leaders, and different brands to spotlight, what greenwashing looks like and what you could do about it. The movement has been acting for over 6 years now to really continuing to challenge the issue of greenwashing, which, ultimately is responsible for distorting different markets, delaying action, undermining trust, and really tackling, really kind of standing in the way of real progress in climate action. So we're going to continue challenging that. That's a core part of what this movement is all about. But, in the midst of kind of continuing to advocate for that, we've noticed that something else is happening too. While we're continuing, to really advocate against greenwashing, one other thing that we're seeing is that, progress is happening. And there's a huge demand for, more climate action. So 89% of people want stronger climate action, and 85% of companies are continuing to expand their sustainability efforts. So most companies are still moving forward with their commitment, despite, so many alarming headlines around the world suggesting that there's a slowdown in this space. But, what we have seen is a trend on the next slide, is that while that progress is happening, the visibility of that progress is disappearing. So that silence is deafening. Even though the impact is happening behind the scenes, there has been kind of a shift into how much companies are talking about this. You've seen kind of that purpose boom of, in the lead up to COVID in the early 2000s. You don't see that as prominently in the advertising and in the communication that we're putting out, that brands are putting out in the world. So why is that? This isn't just about one actor going quiet. It's something that we're seeing kind of across the entire movement. And part of the issue is that, when the whole movement starts to green hush, this is called, this phenomenon has been called green hushing, which is kind of at the opposite end of greenwashing. It's when, companies are quiet about their impact. And that silence is, creating a void where lies spread faster than the truth. And, when you're not hearing the positive stories of impact or the progress being made, unfortunately, that's, transferring power, it's dismantling accountability, And it's quietly also stalling systemic change. If people are looking around and not seeing kind of their peers taking action, that can equally be kind of as problematic as those that are greenwashing. So if you look at our next slide, as one of the fellow Creative for Climate advisors and co-founders of the Conscious Advertising Network, Harry Kingaby, has put it, the real danger happens when responsible voices go quiet and the information spaces get filled by louder, less credible narratives, because that silence is really handing over that power. I was once in a panel where somebody, was actually applauding greenwashing and saying that, greenwashing is a positive thing because it raises accountability. The second somebody is talking about their impact, people are paying attention and ensuring that, those companies are staying true to their promises, as well as, of course, kind of the positive benefits for those brands and organizations of, people aligning more deeply with those brands and processes. But, this silence is where, the danger really lies. Because if you go to the next slide, the silence doesn't just reduce visibility, right? It starts with kind of less visibility, but this sustainability doom loop is actually a vicious cycle. The less visibility you have around these initiatives and kind of progress around climate action, the less perceived value there is around that. And then in turn, the less investment you see companies putting behind these initiatives. And then ultimately that leads to less impact, again, which is this doom loop that we absolutely must cut through. It doesn't just slow progress, but it literally kind of takes a step backwards from all of the impact that we've seen over the past few decades. So effectively, on the next slide, kind of an analogy that you could give to kind of this David and Goliath battle is that effectively, we're working with water pistols in a much larger fight because, the opposition are spending a lot more money on greenwashing or other problematic narratives. They're more organized, they're well funded, and they're also, really shaping false narratives and disinformation at scale. So if you don't have the voices that are making a positive impact in the world advancing, how are we ever meant to kind of withstand against that and really mobilize a more positive impact? So currently we're responding with fragmented voices and isolated campaigns. So this fight against green hushing is really about kind of bringing this movement together and ensuring that we're progressing rather than regressing. So on the next slide, Kubi Naidoo reminds us that, narrative integrity is not just a luxury, it's a responsibility. If we leave the story untold, extractive interests will gladly tell it for us. So there's really kind of this need to kind of get different brands, agencies, communicators, everybody to be louder about the impact, about their work in progress, about, what's at stake. So, because if we don't tell the stories of progress, somebody else will tell a different one, and, this entire narrative and movement will get drowned out. So on the next slide, the message that we really want to convey today and with this guide and, across our entire movement is that, from now until 2030, pro-climate narratives will matter as much as policy or innovation. We really need to kind of, advance. This is so much more about a communication choice. It's a collective influence and resilience strategy. And we really need to make green shouting kind of prominent in, all of our communication strategies, whether you're an agency, a brand, or a communicator. So this is really about kind of advancing, banding together, and seeing how, we can ensure that this comes through and cuts through louder than any of the negative communications that have become so prevalent today. So that's why on the next slide, we've really engaged in this work, in this initiative. This is about creating a stronger, more coordinated and confident narrative ecosystem where, we're ensuring that credible voices are visible, progress is communicated honestly, and silence isn't the default response to risk. And it's not something that, just one organization can do alone and solve alone. So I'm thrilled to be obviously representing Creatives for Climate, which is one of the players here, but also to be celebrating this collaboration across, my former partners at B-Lab and Nice and Serious. This is really bringing kind of different actors from this entire ecosystem together, from a global nonprofit that's equipping the creative ecosystem to preserve truth and the ecosystem, B Lab as a global nonprofit that's transforming the global economy to benefit all people, communities, and the planet, and upholding the standards that help different types of businesses across sectors make a difference. And then Nice and Serious, which is a part of the Ethical Agency Alliance and is a purpose-driven creative agency and certified B Corp that helps make people demand better by not only creating work the world needs and really putting out great examples of green shouting out into the world. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Charlotte for the next part, or sorry, to Sarah for the next part of the session.
Great. Thank you so much, Thea, and thank you, Maria. And welcome all. It's really, really heartening, I have to say, to see the demand for this guide. And I think, Maria, the point you just made around, the way that this work is communicated and the sort of battle over this narrative could in some ways be even more impactful than policy, or at least be informing policy. I hope that resonates with folks here and that really reminds each of us of our agency, in particular in this moment where it can feel that we are losing agency, right? It can feel that we are sort of in this struggle for who can shout the loudest. And so just wanted to thank all of you for being here and remind all of us about the agency that we all continue to have. And so I'm going to get into a little bit about how we can use that agency using this guide that we've all worked on together here. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Sarah. I'm the co-lead executive at B Lab Global. And as I said, I'm here to talk a little bit about what we can do to break out of this doom loop that Maria was referencing. And so on the next slide, basically the point here is that we have words for the things that we don't want, right? We have the words greenwashing and green hushing, and we know that words are really powerful and that they do shape behavior. They shape the narrative. So if we want to change the behavior, then we need our own word, and that word is green shouting. And so on the next slide, you can read here kind of what that means. I'll read it out in just a moment, but just to say, this word is, official now. We're already in a dictionary, in the climate dictionary. And so green shouting is the practice of communicating sustainability efforts openly, accurately, and courageously, and grounding these claims in evidence, acknowledging the challenges, and strengthening a transparent information ecosystem. So it sounds simple, right? Really straightforward. Not necessarily an easy task ahead of us. And we realized that we were going to need more than just a word or a definition. And so on the next slide, this is why we've published the Green Shouting Guide. And this guide is for brands, it's for creators, it is for communicators who genuinely want to support sustainability, but may need help figuring out how to operationalize that, how to convince others. So our goal here is really to mobilize the sector to be able to speak with confidence and with courage, especially right now. And so what's inside this guide is case studies, legal and policy overview, creative examples, tips on handling even resistance from stakeholders. We think it's worth a read, and you can take a look. We'll review some of the key takeaways today. So on the next slide, what does green shouting really mean? What are the forces that drive it across different audiences, behaviors, and parts of the business? I won't go through this whole slide here, but what we've done here is kind of demonstrate the difference between these three different words, what each of them means. So if greenwashing is saying more than you are actually doing, and green hushing is doing a lot without actually talking about it, then green shouting is quite simply telling compelling stories about what you are doing right now. And so on the next slide, let's talk about should you shout and about what, if you are willing to do that. So to be clear, what makes green shouting different is that it is based in reality. It's based in facts. And so that means taking a few steps before you even think about communicating around this. So first, do you have a robust sustainability strategy in place? If you have work to do here, if you're not sure, then the B Impact tool, which is an open source free tool that companies use to pursue their B Corp certification, and hundreds of thousands of other companies have used and have not pursued B Corp certification, but have used it to measure, monitor their performance. It's freely available. So please go to bcorp.com, click sign in. It's a free tool and it's been designed to help all of us measure and better understand what do we have in place and where do we have gaps. So again, do you have a robust sustainability strategy in place? The second, shout about what really matters. But how do you identify the areas that matter most to your business and key audiences, and where you make the most impact? And Corley Kenna here, who's on from Patagonia, she's going to speak a little bit later. She has a video interview in the guide where she talks about how this has been key for Patagonia and for their really famous headline grabbing campaigns, particularly around moderating consumption or protecting public lands. And then the second piece of shouting about what matters, again, focus on where you are credible and where speaking up can make a real difference for you and for your stakeholders. And then the last component here is really around timing and team. So does this matter to your audience or the wider cultural and social landscape in this moment in time? We heard a great example at our recent launch event at Change Now with Back Market. They saw an opportunity to keep millions of laptops in circulation when Microsoft announced that they were discontinuing support for older versions of Windows. And so Back Market took that moment to roll out a new campaign that was called the Obsolete Computer. And it was focused on keeping these perfectly usable computers from making a mass exodus into landfills worldwide by updating their operating system. The other thing you're going to need is to get the right team in place. So this can be in-house or external or a combination of the two. And make sure that they understand the nuances that we're discussing today. So that might mean sharing this guide with your colleagues. It might mean hosting a workshop to apply this material to your brand. There are also a lot of great agencies that are B Corps and members of Ethical Agency Alliance. You can find them on the B Corp website as well. And so on the next slide, what you'll really want to do is to check your claims. You need to make sure that any claims that you're making about your company or your products can be backed up. So you've got a checklist here. I won't kind of go through all of them here, but it comes straight from the guide, and it's a really useful reference for your strategists, your copywriters, even colleagues in legal, maybe especially colleagues in legal. So the other thing I just want to name here is that this last point here, the bonus point section, it is even better, and actually in some places like the European Union, increasingly going to be regulated. It is even better if your claims can be verified by someone else, by a third party. And so on the next slide, a little bit of a sort of interactive sort of opportunity here, I suppose. It's important that we really engage and talk honestly and openly about sustainability labels. There are a lot of certifications and labels out there, right? These can help brands concisely communicate that their sustainability efforts are legitimate, but not all labels are created equal. And so on the next slide, maybe if you want to drop in the chat a little bit of kind of what your perspective is on these. Here are just a few examples. Maybe drop in the chat. I'm curious how many of us know which of these labels are legitimate, meaning they're actually, you know, verified and have some sort of third-party rigor. Feel free to drop in the chat any of your thoughts in there. I'll give you the answers in just a minute. But I do want to name that starting this fall, if you market your products in the European Union, brands that use labels like some of these are going to have to be able to show that they are legitimate third-party certifications and that their claims are based on publicly available criteria and robust auditing. So no more sort of self-created green logos in the EU. So a few sort of examples here just to name. Yeah, I'm seeing folks kind of engaging with that in the chat. The legitimate, you know, labels on this slide include Fair Trade, 1% for the Planet, B Corp, and Rainforest Alliance. So you may have seen, you know, these other labels on different products. Maybe you're familiar with them in your own company. These would not pass the test in the EU, and certainly for this green shouting guide. And so on the next slide, if you've answered yes to all or some of the above questions that I said before, you have the foundations right to be able to shout about the work you're doing. And you're probably wondering, okay, so what do we actually say? We know we have to be accurate, but how do we make this interesting? How do we make this relevant to the audiences that matter to us? How do we make this compelling? And so for that, I'm going to hand that over to Tom, who's going to give us some great insights and case studies. Tom, over to you.
Great. What a fantastic segue, Sarah. Thank you. Lovely to kind of to have so many people join this call, and what a fantastic and optimistic project to be involved with. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Nice and Serious. We're a very proud B Corp certified creative agency, and also I'm an advisor to Creators for the Climate. So I've been working in this space for 20 years to be able to work on something like this, where we can take some of those learnings from the entire community of progressive brands and try and distill it, has been a fantastic collaboration with the folks from Creative for Climate and B Lab. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to take you through some of those learnings and advice and hopefully give you some real practical take homes. And then what's wonderful is that we're going to hand over to some really fascinating brands who are kind of putting this into practice. So you're not just going to be hearing from me, you're going to be hearing from some amazing brands with Patagonia, Tony's, Chocolonely, and Formula E as well. Some really interesting case studies. So let's jump into it. So to kind of start with this, because what we set out to do was to really analyze the kind of businesses who have continued to communicate confidently during these difficult times. And we started by having a shout out to the Creators for Climate community, to our networks, and we got hundreds of brilliant examples who are businesses are putting this into practice. And initially, we sort of set out to try and identify whether there was a set formula that organizations were using in order to communicate with confidence. But actually, quite quickly, what we realized is that there wasn't one formula, but actually different tactics that organizations were using, whether it was consciously or unconsciously, to continue communicating during this difficult time. And that's what we've ended up with. So if you go to the next slide, please. We ended up developing what we refer to as the 7 dials of green shouting. So I think sometimes in this space, we always look for that silver bullet or formula of, oh, if I can just do X and Y, my communications are going to be amazing. They're going to get through legal, and I'm going to engage my customers or colleagues fantastically. But actually what we noticed is, looking at some of these examples, we started categorizing them and started identifying different techniques that brands were using in different levels in order to engage their customers and colleagues with confidence. And actually, we developed these 7 dials, as we call them, because we recognize that actually it's not about just doing 3 things the same. It's about recognizing that each brand, each organization has a unique way of talking, and that we all have access to these different dials that we can dial up and dial down depending on the subject and the brand that we are. So it's a really powerful toolkit that we can all use in order to communicate more with confidence. So I'm going to quickly take you through 4 of those dials and then hand you over to some fantastic speakers to talk through the final 3. So next slide, please. So potentially the place to start is the dial of simplicity. Now you might ask, simplicity, what do you mean by that? But actually, arguably, I could start by saying that actually jargon puts our communications on mute. And I think one of the problems is, given there's been so much scrutiny around sustainability, and there's been so much kind of interaction with legal teams, often organizations have lent on jargon as a bit of a crutch in order to kind of really specify what we mean. But actually, the businesses that we felt were really shining through with confidence are those that really clarified their communications in a kind of simplistic tone, speaking in plain English or plain language, whatever language they're speaking in, and actually avoiding scientific jargon where it wasn't helpful. So, for example, Pip and Nut are a UK-based peanut butter brand, and a B Corp are a fantastic example of a business that doesn't use complex scientific terminology but keeps their language simple. For example, this campaign called AKA Palm Oil was an example of where they helped their customers translating these complex Latin names used to describe palm oil, highlighting where the problem is for those who want to avoid it. Or Abel and Cole is another kind of fruit and veg box, fantastic campaign called, I think it was called Unprocess Our Food, talking in real plain, simple English to give their kind of customers and colleagues the confidence to speak up loudly about sustainability. So the next style is on the other end of it, and we talk about this as abundance, which is all about sort of amping up more about the things that people can get with sustainability and dulling down the things that people don't want. Now, I think one of the challenges in sustainability is we're often locked in this mindset that actually it's about giving things up, that sacrifice will somehow sell. But in reality, it very rarely sells if we look at it from an advertising point of view. So what's really important is to not think about products as like, this is more sustainable, but actually, what does that product, what does that sustainable solution unlock? And how can you really dial up the abundance in that communication in order to connect more with your customers and your colleagues? So for example, Palmetto, which is a US based renewable energy company, do fantastic kind of maximalist campaigning where they talk about more about getting customers what they love and less of what they don't. So they're amplifying the issues that their customers really care about, whether that's more life, more comfort, but keeping negatives like bills to a minimum. So it's really thinking about how can you flip the message to talk about what sustainability unlocks. Or if you look at the Dutch-based business Too Good To Go, which is all about rescuing kind of food that hasn't sold within the kind of retail or trade business and packaging it up. I think it's fantastic how they communicate with their surprise boxes. So they don't talk about the fact the food hasn't been sold and might be, you know, a little less tasty than if it was taken out the oven fresh. They talk about the surprise and the joy of getting food at a lower cost that still tastes great. So it's about amping up the positive messages of abundance and dialing down sacrifice, because that isn't going to drive the change we want to see. So next slide, please. We go on to the third dial, if we can flick on to the next slide, which is about culture. Oh, if we can go back one, fantastic. So culture is all about really trying to align your message with culture at that point in time. Now, one of the perhaps criticisms of the sustainability or progressive movement is that we spend so much time within our own bubble, we sometimes lose touch of what's happening in broader culture. And actually, when we can align our communications, our claims and our campaigns with what's happening in culture, we can really amplify the message. And I think this was done particularly well last year by the circular sort of deodorant and kind of toiletry brand Wild, where they partnered with brands like, where they partnered with celebrities like Emma Raducanu during Wimbledon for the, I think it was called the Champions of Change campaign, sort of partnering with an influencer that's very aligned with what they do, but also kind of simultaneously demonstrating the performance benefit of the product as well. So being culturally aligned in order to amplify the message. Or there's a great example of Good Power, who is an NGO that worked on a storyline alongside Grey's Anatomy and heat domes to try and align with a culturally significant message at that point in time. So just being really cognizant of what's going on with your customers, what's going on in the world at that point in time, to make sure what you're talking about can kind of piggyback on those cultural movements. But of course, it's about showing up in the right and authentic places. There's nothing more cringe than when a brand trying to jump onto a cultural movement that they're not part of. So it's been really kind of conscious of that too. So finally, before I hand over to the other speakers, the fourth dial is all about disruption. Now, this is when we launched the campaign, the guide last week in Change Now, we had the fantastic back market talking about this. Now, sometimes you can be in an industry where it's almost, the product is so almost ubiquitous like tech that sometimes we don't challenge the status quo in what is quite a damaging industry where products are often so quickly upgraded and then end up in huge e-waste piles. And actually sometimes as a brand, if you have the authenticity and you've done the homework, you've got the strategy in place like Sarah said, then sometimes it's necessary to campaign, to challenge the status quo in the kind of industry and do so in order to kind of shake things up and to start a conversation. Now, obviously it's important that you've done your homework, but also that you can offer your customers and colleagues a solution so they still have a sense of agency. And I think it was fantastic what Back Market were doing because they partnered with Google Google Chrome in order to kind of offer free or incredibly low cost updates to keep those computers in circulation. So it was a real offering to the market. So it wasn't disrupting for disruption's sake. It was doing so very strategically to communicate a message, to start a conversation, to push that agenda forward. And likewise, the cereal brand Hollies, or Holies, I think, who are based in the Netherlands, do some great work around raising awareness around the hidden sugars contained in breakfast cereals that are often kind of unintentionally or purposefully disguised. They do some great stuff helping customers disrupt, but giving them a solution too. So these are just 4 dials that every brand can kind of look to. And again, it's important to think through what's authentic for you. In some instances, you might turn down a dial, but really dial up another dial if it's right for you and your issue. But next, I'm going to hand over to, I think it might be Tony's, but I just want to double check. It is great. I'm going to hand over to Chris from Tony's, who's going to talk through the next dial and give some fantastic case studies about how they're bringing that to life. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Tom. Hope you can all hear me well. And nice to be here today and to explain one of the dials. Before I dive in, I'm Chris. I lead the sustainability department at Tony's, but more about what we do later. If you can go to the next slide. Because before I dive in, I wanted to quickly explain the dial I've been asked to give a few examples by. And that dial is tone and how to tune into your voice, how to tune into your tone. So every company has their own unique tone of voice. And for sustainability communications to feel authentic, or basically any type of communications, I wouldn't limit it to sustainability communications. It needs to generally reflect who you are as a brand. I think, if I go over some examples, that will become a bit more clear of how we approach that at Tony's. And if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so before I dive in to the examples, I wanted to give a very short explanation of who we are as a brand and what we stand for, because I think it's important to understand that in order to also understand the examples that I wanted to give. For the people that don't know us at all, we are Tony's Chocolonely, impact company that makes chocolate, not the other way around. And we exist to end exploitation within the cocoa value chain. And when we talk about exploitation within cocoa, we specifically mean what we see as the 3 main issues within cocoa. The first main issue being poverty. And poverty exists within cocoa because of the systemic underpayment of cocoa farmers. So roughly 60% of the world's cocoa produce comes from just 2 countries, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana in West Africa, where cocoa is mostly produced by millions of smallholder farmers most of them will live far below the poverty line. And the first main issue, poverty, directly leads to the 2 other main issues that we see within cocoa. It's basically a domino effect, and it forces farmers to other forms of exploitation. The first being child labor. As farmers can't afford workers on their farms, they often turn to their own children to do the work. And another consequence of poverty is that farmers are left with few options but to try to produce and sell more chocolate and clearing land to do so, leading to deforestation. And if you go to the next slide, these are all very serious topics. When we talk about what we stand for as a brand, like ending exploitation, we often talk about topics like poverty, child labor, deforestation. And the first communication that I wanted to highlight today is our annual FAIR report. It's our yearly report. It's our biggest publication yearly. It includes both our financial statements as well as our sustainability reports. The main thing I wanted to highlight here is that whilst this is, of course, a super serious communication and it includes all the nitty-gritty, all the details, we really tried to bring it in a fun and positive way. Why? Because our tone of voice, when we talk about that dial of really tune into your own tone, we really try to be always bold, human-led, fun. One of our core values as a brand is makes you smile. Even when talking about these serious topics, and you see that both in how we design certain or all of our comms, in the colors that we use, like the small gimmicks that you also see here on the cover of our annual FAIR report, but also in the language that we use. And if you go to the next slide, I also wanted to highlight a few examples of, oh, I see that the fonts are not working, yeah, how we use storytelling to translate those nitty-gritty results from our annual fair reports. And what you see here is what we published on LinkedIn. It's a carousel that we shared that both goes over all the nitty-gritty stuff of how many cocoa farmers we reached, how many children, how many cases of child labor we remediated that year, how many cocoa farms were in our supply chain, but also really doing a hand or reach out to the industry, to all cocoa sourcing companies out there, to commit for the long term on a higher price. And really trying to, well, as you can see, it's really bold. We tried to use humor, we tried to make it fun and light, despite it being serious topics. And I also wanted to give a quick shout out to the other mission allies. That's what we call companies that are sourcing through our supply chain. Why we focus on specifically those mission allies on LinkedIn is, of course, because it's a business platform. So also when we use that same tone of voice, we do, of course, try to look at what's the specific audience that we're targeting. And an additional shout out to the two companies that were already mentioned here in the webinar today, Pip and Nut and Holies, who are both mission allies of Tony's, and source their cocoa through our supply chain using our 5 sourcing principles. And if you go to the next slide, just wanted to quickly highlight what I mean when talking about different audiences, how you then slightly still change that tone of voice or slightly change the messaging. So if you look at what we published on Instagram, as you can see here on the screen, it's a very similar carousel, but then it excludes those mission allies that focus on other companies, as it's of course not a business platform, but instead focuses on what you can do as a general consumer. By enjoying our tasty chocolate, but also by being conscious about the type of chocolate that you buy. And if you go to the next slide, because of course I think it's quite obvious what Tony's does when talking about our sustainability communications, but we also really try to bring this to life in our general marketing and product marketing. So if you press play.
Tony's Chocolonely? Is that any good? Proper good. All right. Every bite fights exploitation in the cocoa industry. Tony's fights deforestation too. Oh, I do like a tasty chunk. Yeah, so do I, as it happens. Get your own. Tony's Chocolonely.
There's fight in every bite.
Yeah, thanks for showing. So I think that really highlights well that we really tried to be very consistent, always use the same tone of voice. And if you go to the next slide.
What do you do for a living?
I fight exploitation.
And what does that mean? My goodness! What? Yay!
We really brought this to life as well in one of the biggest train stations in the UK. To really make this a human-led, fun, bold story. And if you go to the next slide, the last thing I wanted to share is that even when talking about, for instance, sorry, to the next slide. Something odd in the, oh, that's strange. If you go to the previous slide, there's something wrong with the slides, no worries. I was missing a slide here on EUDR and how we advocate on LinkedIn as well about these serious sustainability legislation. And there we also really tried to be fun and direct. Like the header there is Hey EU. So also there we tried to really break the mold a little bit. And be very consistent in the way that we speak up and use our voice. Thanks. I think looking at the time, I'll leave it at that for today.
Let's hand over to Formula E.
Thank you very much. So I think we can start with the video. Carmen, if you can play it.
Oh, which is always good when it does this. 1 second, let me
give it a second try. That was
let
just
me try it.
things in context. Otherwise, it's not the end of the world.
Now, for the first time, Formula E will stand on the top step of the podium.
Great, thank you very much. So that was just to give a little bit of context. This is obviously a different kind of brand play and communications around sustainability credentials, because we are a sports business, as you've clearly seen and understood. Just a few words on Formula E and then about myself. So Formula E was created 12 years ago as the first and only full electric racing series in the world. We were not created because the world needed another racing series. We were created because the world needed to improve when it comes to sustainable mobility. And we act as a double laboratory when it comes to advancing electrification on our roads, because we have car manufacturers that come and develop technologies to perform and race and win. But at the same time, they transfer these technologies into the passenger cars that you and I will end up driving or being driven in. And ultimately, the other lever that we use is that sport is basically one of the things that gathers billions of people around the world, fascinates people. Motorsport is the second most popular sport after football. So we have basically a responsibility to, I think, showcase to our audiences the fact that you can live a sustainable lifestyle that is really exciting, and you can showcase some clear sustainable options and alternatives. So if we move on to the next slide. Formula E has been really trying to walk the talk from the get-go, from the creation of the championship back 12 years ago. We've had many milestones on this journey to showcase that our communication is robust, and echoing to some of the things that have been said in this introduction and preamble. So we've been certified ISO 20121 for 10 years. We've been ranking for 4 years in a row since its creation, basically the GSBS index, which is the only independent ESG ranking that exists when it comes to sustainability in terms of comparing different sports and entities. And we are certified against the net zero standard pathway from BSI. So clearly trying to bring some robustness before we start going out and talk about the sustainability credentials of the series. So if we go next, one of the obviously latest, proudest milestone of the life of the series is our B Corp certification. It's a project that we started with, the support, even if obviously they were here to make sure that we would live up to the standard of B Corp, but it's also with the support of B Corp and B Lab all together. Why? Because I think we both identified that there was an opportunity really to bring the sports community into the B Corp movement, because really it's about bringing everyone on board and sending a strong signal to consumers. And ultimately, that's one of the good things that sports community does. And we were very happy to be the guinea pig of that. We're extremely proud to have achieved it. But we've not done it, to be able to say, okay, we've done it, like the rest, you can maybe try and deal with it. It's really about now bringing the rest of this community on board and celebrating other sports joining the movement, so that we speak with one voice. Because although I'm not a comms expert, we all know that this is basically through hammering the same message that we will get consumers to understand and be able to make conscious choices. If we move on to the next slide. We can. Amazing. So first of all, the opportunity to cut through the noise. That's the first thing that seduced us with B Corp, because B Corp is probably the only certification that is very robust and rigorous, but cuts through both the living rooms and the boardrooms. And ultimately, this is something that, I mean, you have seen the other certifications that we undertook. They are obviously very robust, but very hard to communicate to an audience of people that are coming to your event or turning up the TV because they want to have fun and watch cars that are racing, overtaking. And, like basically your brain is switched on something different. And we think, the B Corp certification is something that we can easily communicate to our audience and turn them into basically advocates and consumers that will choose to dedicate their time, as they are doing with our sport, to something that has more purpose and more meaning when it comes to the other products and services as part of the B Corp community. The next slide, thank you, shows also, the power of the ecosystem. Because communicating about sustainability credentials through our B Corp certification also means that we involve tens of stakeholders that will amplify and probably also share this appetite to really be part of the effort. So some of the most important things that we know from both the B Corp, let's say, studies when it comes to the brands and the consumers are, one, the fact that there's a clear alignment. Formula E has one of the youngest audiences in the sports sector. Most of our audience is under 35 and quite gender balanced, which is unusual in sport and believe me, very unusual in motorsports. We're roughly at 60% male and 40% females that follow us. And also the brands that are gravitating around us when it comes to sponsorship, because the business model of our sport is quite the usual. Most of the revenues come from sponsors, but our sponsors come to us because they want to work and showcase their sustainability credentials. And that's really important to us because we know that is something that resonates with our fans. 80% of our fans basically feel and look for this authentic association and affiliations when it comes to sustainability. And ultimately, it's also really how we translate and create basically further credentials for the series. And that's one of the things that was clearly highlighted in our B Corp efforts. The fact that our programs are generating social impact and generating impact altogether, positive impact, also because we engage what we would call scope 3 in a very boring way, but we engage our entire supply chain to, I won't say it, supply chain to change in this journey with us. And obviously the other key lever here is that we use our teams and our drivers. You will have seen them in the video, to be also ambassador of this, because it's very nice if I say it. It's much more fascinating if it's one of our racing drivers that has just been on the podium talking about it. So we're really trying to mobilize all those emotions to make sure that there's a clear cut through and a simple message, which is sustainability is not a compromise. Sustainability is something that is really cool and really accessible for you. And the first thing that we showcase is about mobility, but we showcase a variety of things and options when it comes to our events and the way we deliver them. If we go on to the next slide, just a little bit about what I think was different in our B Corp certification and things that I think are important as something to take away and communicate to your different stakeholders ultimately is obviously having a robust sustainability strategy was the key to make sure that we would achieve the B Corp certification, and the robustness of some of the standards that we had implemented obviously made us basically be on the right pathway to get there. But some of the most important elements, which are things that we also communicate externally, are or ongoing environmental efforts when it comes to reduction, the use of renewable energy, the fact that our events are delivered in accordance to the International Standard for Sustainability in Events, the huge focus that we put on our local communities, and that, again, we try and relay and inspire on social media, because we know that there's a need for connection to someone that is going to be close to you and look like you in the different race locations where we operate. We have a huge focus on children and children's education. We have also a huge focus on women and gender parity, because motorsport is a white male, middle-aged dominated world most of the time. And we're trying to break both these, I think, reality and also showcase that there's a projection and a place for women in this world. And obviously a commitment to, the principle of sustainability, but transparency, accountability, and governance. But this obviously is probably quite a given for this audience. Next slide, please. That's basically what you get when you get a full stage for an A celebrity branded B Corp certification for the first time. A very proud moment. And also again, you probably have 20 or 30,000 people that are physically standing in front of the stage, and you have millions of people that are looking at that on their TV screen. So the impact is real. And then I think this is the last slide, if we can go next. The key takeaways of, because this is all about communication and the things that we're trying to communicate for people to take away on the B Corp certification is, the fact that they're only in the first B Corp sport, but again, not in the mindset of we want to remain. We actually want to invite the other sports to join us on this journey and basically push the movement further. The importance of meeting those global standards when it comes to environmental and social impact, very, very important, and probably a bit unexpected for a sport, and especially in motorsport. So trying to basically break the biases and disrupt, to the words of Tom earlier, and ultimately reminding that it is a global movement to benefit people and the planet, and we need everyone to row in the same direction, whether people produce clothes, ice cream, coffee, or ultimately us delivering a sporting product. And I think that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, now we're going to hand over to Corley from Patagonia.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be with y'all. I'm Corley Kenna. I'm Patagonia's Chief Impact and Communications Officer. And it's always great to be with our friends at Tony's Chocolonely. And Julia, wonderful to meet you. Thank you for that great presentation about Formula E. Really exciting stuff there. So we can advance to the next slide. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to start with just green shouting is good business, and it's never been more important. This picture from Artemis 2, which I think has captured, am I having a volume problem? I'm seeing a note. Keep going. Okay. This picture captures our imagination, I think, and mostly just reminds us of the beauty of our home planet. However, unfortunately, right now, we are living in a time where trust in institutions has never been lower, and that's especially true for governments around the world, including here in the US. And businesses. And most people think that businesses and governments are only making their lives harder and really only benefiting the wealthy and the very few. And instead of most businesses leaning in and trying to do more to create solutions to save this beautiful planet, they're leaning out and they're going silent. They're rolling back on programs, commitments, or worse. Next slide. But at Patagonia and within the B Corp community, that's not what's happening, because we exist to be in service of our customers and our communities. And one thing that unites all of us is that desire to not just make a really good product or deliver on a good service, but to do more, to be in service, like I said, of people and planet. This is a photo of me and some of my colleagues last year at a protest advocating for National Park Service workers to be paid, if you can believe that. And just imagine if every business would lean in on these types of things. What would our communities, what would our planet look like if we were literally all shouting about this? Next slide. At Patagonia, not only do we exist to do more than provide a great product, but we believe that we can and do contribute to solutions to protect our home planet. And we do that really through two ways: trying to do our best to operate as a responsible business, but also in support of thousands of environmental nonprofits all around the world. And we are not going to be quiet about what we believe in, and we aren't going to change how we do our business just because a politician or several politicians say that we should. Those politicians don't know anything about our business, so why in the world would we change our course because of them? And here's the thing: our customers and our community quite literally power our business and our impact. We don't exist without our customers, and our impact doesn't exist without our customers. They fund the protection of nature, including this beautiful place, the Cochimo Valley in Chile. And they do that through the purchase of our product. 1% of sales every day of the year goes to environmental nonprofits through a commitment you saw on a previous slide called 1% for the Planet. And not only are their contributions protecting these places, but they're engaging with us to protect these places. They are helping us to raise money for other nonprofits. They're adding their names to petitions. They are calling Congress and other government officials to protect places like this. And as a result of this relationship, our customers have made clear time and time again that they don't want us to go silent or be less bold or do less to clean up the mess that we create. So we keep doing our best to keep our community educated on the biggest issues facing our planet. And as you might have noticed, we aren't getting less bold. We aren't afraid when the opportunity arises to be clear about our positions, especially when we're asked or questioned on them. And so here's an example early from my time at Patagonia of how we've done this. Thank you. And all these three things coming together. So I started at Patagonia just ahead of the 2016 presidential election. And one of the first campaigns I worked on was called 100% for the Planet. After that first Tuesday, that's when we vote here in the US in November, and we saw the results of an election that surprised us, to say the least. We decided to change what we were going to do for Black Friday, which was just a couple of weeks later. And we decided we were going to donate 100% of the sales from that day to the environmental nonprofits that we support. We thought this was a good way to reaffirm our commitment to these nonprofits on this busiest shopping day of the year and in this time of pretty big despair for them. We estimated it would be about a $2 million shopping day, maybe $5 million if it was a good one. But after we told our community that we were going to do this, next slide, please. It turned into a $10 million day. So we gave away $10 million that Black Friday. It was a moment that broke through all the regular Black Friday sales, advertisements, all of those things. And it really felt good to support these nonprofits this way. And by the way, not only did we give away $10 million that year, but we gained lots, thousands of new customers that are still with us today. Great example, I think, of green shouting working. If you can go to the next slide, please. So that was a really good, feel-good example of green shouting, but a more recent example of literal green shouting is a project that we worked on last year, which was publishing our first ever impact report, which we called a work in progress report. And you might be wondering why, after 52 years of being in business, did Patagonia think it was time to publish an impact report, especially when the kind of corporate trend was moving away from these sorts of things As I mentioned, lots of companies kind of going quiet and not wanting to talk about the impact they create. But we thought it was a good thing to do after 52 years. It wasn't something our customers were necessarily asking for. And as a private company, we are not expected or required to publish this kind of report. But we thought it was time to finally kind of document our progress, to be transparent about the good and the bad and the in between, and share a little bit more about our values and hopefully our personality. This report included the 1% giving that I mentioned earlier, and also our newer corporate structure, which we had been trying to share about, but it's a little confusing. And so this report detailed it in a new way. It also shared, as part of that new corporate structure, where the money in that goes. So that's a whole separate giving program that we have through our co-owner called the Hold Fast Collective. And it included kind of everything in between, how we pay our employees, the makeup of our stores and global regions, a lot of supply chain topics, and kind of everything in between. We released this in this past November. Again, it's called this Work in Progress Report. We chose that name intentionally because we wanted it to reflect the fact that we think of ourselves as an experiment in running a business differently, and that we are actually a literal work in progress. It's the most comprehensive view of the business that we've ever released. And it's certainly not meant to be a victory lap or a way to sell jackets, just a way to stay accountable. In brainstorming how to promote this report, we thought it would be fun to respond to some of our biggest critics or criticism. And so we came up with this idea called fan mail. And this video, hopefully it plays, is an example of that.
This is Patagonia fan mail. Patagonia uses the same factories as fast fashion brands. It's true.
Yes, we do. And we want them to.
We don't own our supply chain. A lot of times we're less than a percentage of the production.
What that is for us in the work we do is an opportunity. In general, we're 1%, 2%, 3% of overall production at just about every facility we operate in.
So when we think about solutions, we think about the bigger problem and like how could we influence the industry to adopt those solutions.
Sometimes brands, if they know that Patagonia is using that factory, they feel comfortable because they know that we do in-depth work.
If we can do that and then they adopt it, I mean, that impact is massive.
That's our compound interest. That's the outsized contribution that we can have to solving these problems.
Then there's hope. Like, then we're actually trying to save our home planet.
Okay, so maybe that's not so much green shouting as it is green trolling, but we had some fun with it and it was great to see the reactions. And it turns out this first ever report that we made really exceeded expectations. It was a PDF, and yet thousands, maybe millions of people around the world downloaded it and read it and engaged with it, which was super exciting to see. But far more important than any of the like KPIs or metrics that we set out, I think, was the reaction we got, which really just is boiled down to one word, which is honesty. And we heard that over and over again from friends, from media, from other businesses, from, policy wonks who care a lot about supply chains. They just kept coming back to say like, wow, this is just so honest. And I'm not sure what it says about the state of corporate reporting that honesty is this very positive benchmark and something notable to say. But that's really the reaction that we got. And I really believe it's that honesty that made it cut through and stand out from all the other kinds of impact reports. And also just one note here, we took a ton of inspiration from other B Lab companies in how they do this. And so thank you to those of you who believe in honesty and who create reports with honesty at the center of your storytelling. Patagonia is not perfect by any means. We are a complicated and messy company, and we are the first ones to say that. But being open and honest and humble about where we've missed the mark is a really important part of what makes us, I think, a little bit better. And it's also how we help to push our industry and the business community forward. I think another thing is sort of in thinking about the language and the importance of honesty and transparency. Tom said something earlier about jargon and why you should avoid it. I think that point is so true. Your comms go on mute the second you're using too much jargon. So thank you, Tom, for that reminder. But back to the actual kind of work of cleaning up your mess that your companies create, because we all do. We can't let perfection hinder progress here. There's way too much at stake to be perfectionists in this work, and frankly, too many problems to be perfectionists. If we can go to the next slide. So to close, we cannot at Patagonia claim, and we do not, to be a sustainable company. The best we can do is to be responsible. That journey is moving all the time, but let's stay committed on it, and let's make sure we are talking about it, maybe shouting about it. In that work to be a responsible company, Green Shouting is a natural blend of our communications and our values, but it really has to start with the work itself. We all want to prove that business can be a force for good. We can't prove that without doing the actual work that supports that ideal. Communicating about our journey helps us to motivate us internally and hopefully helps to inspire other companies to commit to that work and that ideal too. Businesses should clean up their own mess and share how they do it so others can follow. When we do that, Green Shouting becomes part of our genetic makeup, and I hope it is and can be for your company too. Thanks so much. Oh, and download our report if you haven't already.
I'll just leave it up for a few seconds and people can take it down.
Thanks for that.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. We are now handing over to Rose May from Change Now as our final speaker. As I said at the beginning, we launched this report at Change Now. So if anybody was there, then thank you for joining us. And let's hear from Rose May a bit more about the event.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. And yeah, very pleased to see that you're bringing this topic on the agenda. Green shouting is, yes, super important after greenwashing, green hushing. And so actually Change Now, I think, is the summit of the green shouting. So happy to talk more about it. Just to introduce myself, I'm Rose Melucotte, co-founder and deputy CEO of Change Now. And yes, Change Now just took place last week. So for those who were here, you saw what it was this year, all the positive energy. And for those who were not here, I will share some pictures with you. Some of you may have already come to Change Now other years. For some, it's totally new. So I think it's important that you see what we're talking about, because it's not only an event, it's a summit to talk differently about the transition and really to put light on concrete organizations, solutions, companies actively working toward a more sustainable world. So the summit takes place at the Grand Palais in Paris, which is quite unusual for a business event. It's not in a traditional business fair venue. It's in this magnificent Parisian venue that was built for the World Expo in 1900. So it's also a symbol of the Industrial Revolution And now we want it to be the symbol of the ecological and social revolution. So if you go to the next slide, you can see from within how it looks like. So yeah, we really want this event to be under this beautiful nave with a lot of light. There is a lot of work on scenography, and we were 40,000 people gathered over the past the 3 days last week. So it's quite massive. It's a massive mobilization for sustainability. We have people coming from 140 countries. Here you see one stage, but we have 5 stages plus 4 stages of workshops plus a peach garden. Everything was full. So it's super, it brings a lot of hope to see so much mobilization. And if you go to next slide, I share with you also some just some pictures that has some meaning. So the first one, it's our central installation. Many people took pictures in front of that. And just what I want to show you with that is that it has been created with an artist, because we want art to be fully part of the experience. We need beauty, art, when we talk about the transition. It's not just rationality, it's also about emotions. The other slide is more to show you that it was crowded, and so that was a really good signal for the transition. Then you see the arc, welcome heroes of change. We want the transition to be, we want to build a sense of community. When you come to the summit, we want you to feel that you are a hero of change, you are part of this community. And then we see Kate Raworth on stage. So for those who don't know Kate Raworth, she is the economist, the brilliant economist, world-renowned economist behind the donut economy. And actually, she was here on stage with a new format, talking about the donut economy through a circus show. That was completely crazy, but that was a way also to talk in a much more accessible way about theoretical aspects of the transition. So that's to give you an idea, and so because images speak better than words. So yeah, thanks for. Now we can go to the next slide. A bit more theoretical, but just I think that is interesting to have in mind when we talk about how we communicate on the transition. So I'm sure you probably know, you're familiar with this curve, which is the adoption curve, which is often used for a product, but which is totally working as well for ideas or movements. So we can totally use it as well for the ecological and social transition. So you see in this adoption curve, you have the innovators, the early adopters, early majority, late majority, and the laggards. And what we sometimes don't really talk about when we see this curve is what you have between the early adopters and the early majority, which is called the chasm. There is a chasm because what worked to embark the innovators and the early majority, the speeches that worked for them, don't work to embark the early majority. You need to rethink the way you talk about your product or idea or movement to embark the majority. And so we are at this time right in the chasm. And when we launched Change Now, we were really at the very beginning of the chasm, where we need to talk differently about sustainability. We don't want to talk about the problems only. We don't want to talk about sustainability as a constraint, sometimes in France, for instance, it was for a long time, it was used in politics. Like ecology was something political. Now we want to talk about ecology and social issues in a way that will speak to the majority. So we had to rethink totally the way, the codes we use. So that's why we use emotion. We were inspired by the most modern events in the world, like the tech events, the Cirque du Soleil, many different events that are super inspiring. We mixed them to create an event that is highly modern, highly inspiring, and highly sustainable. So that's the first thing. We need to rethink the way we talk about sustainability. And then the next slide, I wanted to show you the two pillars that were at the basics of our mission at Change Now, and two pillars that are key to build together a strong impact ecosystem. Because there is the green shouting we can all do on our side, but then there is the green shouting we all together create a big green shouting. And for that, there are two major pillars to create this big movement. First, it is to connect with each other. So that's why we created the event, not just to create an event, but because we wanted people to connect. We wanted the innovators, the funds, the corporates, the media, the talents, the investors, the politics to connect. Because in every part of the society, you have people willing to build a sustainable world. So the first part is that we gather, that we create connections. And the second part, and this is more related to communications, is the hexagon you see around the three circles, which we call the inspirational layer in a theory of an ecosystem. To have a strong ecosystem, so you need strong interactions between the different key players, but you need also to have an attractive image of your ecosystem. So we need to make the transition, the ecological and social transition profoundly inspiring and appealing. And for this, we need green shouting, and we need to highlight the best practices, the most inspiring success stories, the best case studies. And that's what we want to do with Change Now. During 3 days, we put light on the best, the most promising solutions sometimes that we see growing year after year. Some started as really early stage a couple of years ago. Now they raised millions, dozens of millions of euros last year. So we want to show success stories just as we hear about success story in the tech ecosystem, because that's what made the tech ecosystem very powerful and very appealing. When you listen to story of entrepreneurs starting in a garage and ending being multi-billionaires, that attracted a lot of people. So we need to share also all the success stories. And it's not just us talking about our success stories. So I can talk for Change Now, but also what we see is that the most powerful way to green shout is actually when people green shout for you. When you have people talking about what you are doing, when you have ambassadors, when you have customers, stakeholders, saying that what you're doing is so inspiring, powerful, honest. So that's this kind of community we want to build, of people getting inspired by other success stories, being inspired for themselves, being inspired to share to their community what they learned. And I don't know if you saw some posts on LinkedIn, but I really saw a big momentum following the 3 days. A lot of people sharing what they discovered at the summit. And I think that's the way we can really all together create a big highlight on sustainable actions in companies and organizations.
Great, thank you so much. That was, yeah, it was a really great event, and I think a few people in the chat have said that they've been or that they would really like to go. So we are nearly at the end, so I'm afraid I'm not going to have time to read out everyone's questions. We have had some good ones, so there are some for some of our specific speakers. So what I'm going to do is just choose one question for each speaker because, yeah, I'm having to be selective due to time. So first of all, one for Tony's, and the question here we've got is, how do brands that don't have sustainability woven into their business model like Tony's perform green shouting without worrying about consumers' opinions? So I think what they're saying is what is an effective communication strategy if it's not really embedded in your operations like it is at Tony's?
Yeah, fun question. And of course, I mean, coming from a Tony's point of view, we have a bit of a luxury position that we are an impact company. And of course, that makes life a little bit easier. So I think it's a very valid question. Maybe a couple of things that directly popped up in my mind when hearing this specific question is that it needs to be rooted in honesty. And I think going back to the dial that I spoke about finding, like, tuning your tone, it needs to be authentic and true. And that even is the case for Tony's, because I also saw quite a few questions in the chat around dairy. And we are also by no means a perfect company. And what we can do and will do is communicate openly and honestly about our impact, where we are very, very proud of the things that we do within the cocoa value chain, but also the things that we are not perfect at yet. So I think dairy is a good example. What we can and will do is offer a great tasting range of vegan chocolates. Many vegan bars out there, recognizable by the green leaf on the taste ribbon on the package. But we don't at the moment invest in direct dairy programs. So I think my advice would be, like, look at the Green Shouting guide, because I think also for companies that don't have an impact background, there are all of the advice is applicable. Find your authentic voice and communicate honestly about what you're doing or not doing.
Great, thank you. I'll whiz on to the next one just for time. So for Patagonia, like many companies with a large turnover, Patagonia was required to prepare for CSRD before the rollbacks. And do you think that you still would have done this without the legislation? So I think there's probably also a question in there around what companies can do despite those rollbacks, should they press on with their sustainability and disclosure plans anyway, even if they're not mandated to.
Yeah, really great question. And maybe a little hard to say, but I think we would. And in part because this is coming. And let's hope that with the rollbacks, maybe the regulation, this is maybe a little Pollyannish, is actually going to get better. But this kind of legislation and regulation is coming here in the US. I don't think it's going to come at the federal government level anytime soon, but we are starting to see in certain states more disclosures, more requirements around things like carbon emissions. And so, yeah, we thought it was a good idea to go ahead and plan for this. We will continue to push ahead. The rollbacks allowed us to be a little choosier about what we were going to lean into first and what we said, okay, we'll do on the next round. But I do think the preparation was useful. I'm glad we did it. And so I think so. And I'm so sorry I have to jet, but it's been really lovely to be with y'all. And thank you so much. Stay in touch, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. So we are at time now. I can try and squeeze in one more question for Formula E if we do it super quickly. Someone has asked, has being a B Corp helped with investor interest? And are there efforts to reduce the environmental impact of the sport beyond the emissions, given that the races can happen anywhere around the world?
Well, it's two questions in one. So I'll be super quick. So regarding the investors, actually, our investors were part of the process because you have to change the statutes of your business to be able to clearly, state literally on paper and in your statutes that you create value not only for your shareholders but for all your stakeholders. And we are obviously a company that has several shareholders, so they were obviously supportive of the undertaking of B Corp certification. And then on the emission reduction, so we basically have our net zero pathway commitment and certification across the entire series. So we calculate the carbon footprint for each and every single race, and it's basically taken into account in the reduction objectives that we have.
Great, thank you for answering that so quickly. That's great. We'll finish there because we have reached time. We don't want to keep anybody longer than you'd planned, but thank you so much to our speakers for sharing all those insights. Thank you to everybody who joined us to watch. The link to the Green Shouting Guide is in the chat if you want to go and grab that now. And please join the Creators for Climate community. Follow us on our social media to find out about our next events, our next webinars, and hopefully we will encounter some of you online or out in the wild at a sustainability event. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.